So today we will talk with Tom McCarthy, author of a book Reminder, and this is project Writers in Motion.
It's your first time in Poland, so how do you feel? In Krakow, you said before the interview that that it's a big, nice city, so hope you enjoy it.
So far, so good, yes.
Yeah.
When we are looking for information about you, we turn our attention to your biography. We learned that, among other things, you worked as a bar attender, as a chief, as a nude model, and we are wondering if this decision were taken on purpose, responding to the need to be close to people, for example, or to feel city. Or maybe this decision were completely random. And did you think at that moment of becoming an author? How was your debut?
I always thought of becoming an author. That's always what I wanted to do. The jobs were dictated by necessity. When I left university, I had a small grant, a very small grant from the British government to be a writer. It wasn't enough to live on in London, but I went to Prague and immediately after the revolution there, or the neoliberal revolution there, and I lived very luxuriously for 1 year with this grant, and then when it finished I needed to work. And lots of my friends that I'd met were artists or art students, and so a good friend of mine got me a job at the art school, and I'd turn up every morning and take my clothes off, and the students would draw me, and then in the afternoon I'd write. So that was how that came about. But it was a very interesting job, actually, because it makes you think a lot about perception. You know, people looking, how to represent from different angles, the whole kind of, you know, phenomenology of that situation. So it kind of did feed into my writing quite a lot. Also working in bars, of course, you chat to people, you get to know various characters.
Reminder is your only one book translated to Polish. It has just been published and has not received a thorough commentary yet. And in our opinion, this book can be interpreted following several criteria. And as in case of Umberto Eco, it can be called an open work. Due to the lack of one domination interpretation, we will play a game of association, which may give rise to various interpretations. And however, before we'll uncover our cards, we would like to ask you, as the author, if during writing your book you were inspired by any specific philosophy or cultural occurrences, or maybe you discussed with or take example of any other authors?
Very much. I mean, the idea for Remainder came to me at the end of 1998, and I wrote it in 1999, 2000. I finished it in 2001, and it wasn't published until 4 years later. But sure, I mean, I grew up on literature. I grew up reading Shakespeare, and Hamlet Shakespeare's Hamlet was a figure I kept thinking of while I was writing Remainder. This man who cannot act, he feels himself inauthentic. He reenacts his own father's death in front of the court. I mean, it's very much a play about mediation, repetition, trauma that kind of returns into the public sphere and the personal sphere. I was thinking a lot about the plays, in particular of Beckett, Samuel Beckett, which often involve, again, reenactment. So in the second half of Waiting for Godot, Vladimir and Estragon reenact themselves from the first half, or in Happy Days, the character Winnie is doing the same gestures every single day, taking things out of a handbag, you know, some lipstick, a gun, always the possibility of violence is there. So I was thinking of this, I was thinking of J.G. Ballard's Crash, a magnificent, I think the great British novel of the last 50 years, which again, you know, involves repetition, replay, trauma, violence, media, these kind of things are triangulated together in that book. In terms of philosophy, I mean, I was reading a lot of Maurice Blanchot, particularly one book of his called The Writing of the Disaster, which is very much about the ineffability of the event, right? We can never name the event. We can never represent the violent, traumatic event. It can only be, it will always elude whatever kind of strategy for representation, and yet we still have to try. I mean, this is the logic of Beckett's work as well. So I was thinking a lot of that, of Derrida. I mean, the very word remainder is a kind of, is the conventional English translation of a set of terms he uses, like restant, revenant, which have the sense of a ghost or something that returns or something that is left behind. So yeah, I was reading a lot of Freud, thinking of psychoanalysis and trauma. Freud's writing on trauma was very important to me, which again for Freud is linked to repetition. So the trauma event remains outside proper memory, but it demands a kind of set of neurotic replays. So that was kind of quite close to the logic of remainder too. So there was a whole bunch of stuff I was kind of thinking about. But the actual novel, it came to me very intuitively. I mean, I didn't set out to write a novel about these things. I was just at a party in a bathroom and I saw a crack in the wall and I had a moment of deja vu. And then I had the idea for the novel. You know, I wasn't even sober. I just, you know, it was intuitive.
So you told about repetition and about authenticity. So I would like to start with a problem which seems to us the most obvious maybe and the most strongly stated reminder. It concerns the obsessive tendency to authenticity, by which the main character is obsessed, reconstructing and rethinking past events in his imagination. The repentance of situation, although motivated by the plot, can irritate the reader, maybe. And maybe was that your purpose? Or the problem of artificiality, replaying, rethinking is linked to your intellectual fascination, just intellectual fascinations?
I mean, authenticity is the or a very dominant psychological and ideological narrative of our era. It's the and I find it to be a conservative ideology, a conservative aesthetic. It's the aesthetic of Nike. It's the aesthetic of late capitalism. You know, it's this constant propaganda for the authentic. You know, be yourself by buying our shoes. Express yourself by getting an iPad. You know, etc., etc. So, I think this, you know, for all kinds of reasons, needs to be undermined. Not least for purely intellectual reasons. It's fake. I mean, authenticity is a complete construct. You know, we are not authentic. We are always, you know, made up of many convergent strands and gaps. And this is, you know, this is a basic kind of psychoanalytic and philosophical truth that's been told to us again and again by people from, you know, going back from Lacan through Nietzsche, through Plato, basically, you know. So, but I guess a part of authenticity, I mean, tied in with the idea of authenticity is an idea of uniqueness, right? Things are authentic because they are unique. So repetition is automatically kind of runs counter to that. Once you've got two copies, this is what Andy Warhol's work is all about, right? As soon as you've got a copy, then, and if you've got 100 copies, nothing is authentic anymore. Everything is just a copy of a copy of a copy. But I find, no, I wasn't trying to annoy the reader. I mean, I know readers that kind of crave a certain fiction of authenticity will be annoyed. I mean, they probably won't read the book or not beyond 10, 15 pages. But I think there's, I genuinely love repetition. I think if you come and, you know, when I was a child, we always used to replay in the playground the goal from the football at the weekend. You know, did you see Kevin Keegan's goal? And let's do it again. And you be Kevin Keegan, and I'll be the goalkeeper. Now we do it again and again and again. It's much more interesting than the original goal. There's this kind of beauty to repeating something. You know, if we come back here tomorrow and do this interview exactly word for word, it's more interesting because we have the difference between now and then, and if we do it every day, there's all these differences and nothing is quite right. And I think also, you know, in terms of my favourite chapter in Remainder is where the hero, anti-hero, does the same. He reenacts the same gangster shooting scene maybe 10, 15 times. And each time he does it more or less the same. He falls off his bicycle, he looks at a puddle in the street, he looks at the side of a building. And this mundane passage of street, if you return to each of its kind of angles and objects again and again and again, they become fascinating. They become, you know, a street column to stop a car from parking there becomes like a column of a Greek temple, you know, if you look at it for long enough and enough times. You know, you notice in a puddle in the street the reflected letters from advertising in the windows of cafes and things. I mean, I think repetition is in itself extremely fertile, and so I have an unironic relation to repetition in that sense.
But finally, the most beautiful for main character was a real death.
Yes. Well, what's at stake throughout the book is violence. It begins with violence and it ends with violence. I mean, the book begins with some accident that he can't name. Something fell from the sky on his head. And of course it ends with him basically killing everyone. I mean, it escalates and escalates to the point of total annihilation. I mean, in Freudian terms, he's living out the death drive. I mean, for Freud, repetition is linked to pleasure, and pleasure drives towards death. That's the end of pleasure, is death. This is exactly the trajectory my hero is thrown along. It's the Wiederholungswahn, the Todes, whatever you call it, the death drive, you know. And sure, yeah. I mean, the point in when the real violence kind of emerges back into the book, it's during a reenacted bank robbery. So it's a kind of fake bank robbery that they do in a real bank, and it becomes real when a gun actually goes off and starts killing people. And this is a kind of ecstatic moment for the narrator because he's ruptured some kind of veil, some kind of screen. But I wouldn't call this a return to authenticity. It's a touching of the real, which is different from authenticity. The real would be another form of violence. It would be an ultra inauthentic eruption of the already inauthentic in order to create a new kind of event. So the real, that's the real, but it's not authentic.
And when I was thinking about what's fake and what's authentic in this book, I thought about London. And London is the only one element which is indisputably related to non-fictional reality. And his topography is recreated in detail.
Yeah.
It's including a lot of specific streets, a name of districts, names of bars, and I have to ask about why did you choose London to be the background of your book, and is there anything personally special in this city? And could the action of your book take place in any other city?
Yeah, I chose London because that's my city. I mean, I grew up in London. I mean, I lived exactly where
I know that
he lived.
that you another your book is acting in Prague.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and when I lived there. Yeah, no, I mean, it was, I think it could take place in almost any contemporary Western city. I mean, the London of that book, which is a kind of late 90s, it's a millennial London, it's characterized by gentrification, by, you know, the rolling out of, you know, Seattle coffee chains, authentic Seattle coffee chains.
I was very curious about that. Needed to drink coffee of the main character, and their obsessive need to these stamps on this card.
Yeah, you get a stamp every time, and he wants the remainder. He wants the surplus one. It's the repetition towards the extra one. But this is, I mean, he's the perfect subject he's the perfect consumer. He actually believes all that shit. You know, he fervently believes.
He's the only one, I
He's
think.
the only one. I think Zizek or someone said, if we believed all this shit, the whole system would collapse in 5 minutes. And he actually does believe it, which makes him in one sense, you know, completely compliant, and in another sense, a kind of revolutionary. I mean, he takes it all so seriously that he'll buy 10 cups to get the 11th, you know, the surplus, the bonus one. And he'll, you know, kill 100 people in order to get a perfect kind of Nike moment. So, yeah, but in terms of London, I mean, so Remainder is now being turned into a movie, and it's with a fantastic director, the artist Omer Fast. But before Omer took it on, another director was going to do it, also a very good director, whose name I've forgotten. And we talked about the city it would be set in because he was Canadian. He's just directed a ballad adaptation. Vincenzo Natali is his name. He didn't want to set the film in London. He said a film set in London becomes about London, and a film set in New York becomes about New York. He wanted to set it in some random, anonymous Western city like Fight Club. You don't know what city it is. It's good that you don't know. It could be anywhere and everywhere and nowhere. But the one city he said we could not set the film is Los Angeles, because then the whole movie would become an allegory about cinema, which it's not. The book is not. That's why there are no cameras.
You told about your character that he's anti-hero, some kind of anti-hero. And I would like to ask you about utopia. Because some part of your book, for example, a very weird organization named UK Time Control, and the main character who is some kind of a big brother, sometimes making all that mess. And I see here some association with such classics, like, for example, 1984 by George Orwell. And is utopia, in your opinion, always deemed to become anti-utopia? And do you think about your novel in such categories?
Yeah, I mean, there's a utopian kind of strands to it. He wants to make this cult, almost. He's like a cult leader. I think at one point in the book, he describes his followers as being members of a cult whose messiah has not yet appeared. Has not yet reappeared. No, he hasn't appeared the first time. It's like Christianity before Jesus, you know. They're waiting for they have the cult already, they're just waiting for the reason. And certainly there's a kind of utopianism. I mean, he wants to, I suppose naively, he has this idealist vision of an authentic universe down to the most smallest detail, which he's desperately trying to create. Of course, this becomes a dystopia and he becomes a kind of fascist. I mean, in a way, he is like Big Brother or worse. It's almost like he's running a concentration camp or something, or a prison. And I like that kind of ambiguity, you know. I wanted to keep that ambivalence. You never know whether he's a revolutionary or a fascist. I mean, maybe he's a bit of both. So it's utopian and dystopian at the same time.
I would like to come back to the memory problem in your book. The main character of Remainder only pretends to regain his lost memory by acting in such a way. But in fact, he recreates pseudo memory from fragments of ideas, expectations, associations, and experiences from other characters, which he constructs his new personality. And I have to ask about your opinion. Does notions such as unitary memory, non-intermediate exist, or we are always deemed to hybridization of memory, of our memory? And how do you think about the main character's memory, how it looks like?
Yeah. So he starts out reconstructing his own memory, and then he reconstructs other people's, then he makes hybrid memory situations. I mean, here's the thing. Andy Warhol said that before he was shot, he had this suspicion at the back of his head that what was in front of him was just television. This is not life, this is television. After he was shot, he was certain this is television, right? And for my hero, it's similar. His memories come back to him like back episodes of a soap opera. It's like he's watching, The Sopranos in a big binge, like 20 hours at a time. And he says, well, sure, they were my memories, but it didn't really matter. It could have been someone else. If I had a different tape to watch, I would have remembered that instead. Like when you go to in the old days when you used to get your photographs developed, you took them to the chemist, and sometimes you get the wrong ones back and you have a holiday that wasn't yours. He says, I don't care, I remember this, I remember that, it doesn't really matter. And so his own kind of, individual memories open out into, he doesn't really make, for him the distinction between what's his memory and what isn't is not an important one. And I think there's a lot of literary precedent for this. I've just written an introduction to the new edition of Tristram Shandy by Lawrence Sterne, the 18th century novel. And there's a character in there called Uncle Toby who's been wounded in a battle. In fact, he's been shot in the groin. And he obsessively reconstructs in his garden with his gardener. He rebuilds a model of the citadel that he was trying to attack and where the ramps were and where the wall is. And when he's finished that, he starts reconstructing models of other cities where there's been other battles, and he tries to find out every important battle in recent history and reconstruct that. It doesn't matter what's his and what's not. I mentioned Crash earlier. Ballard's Vaughan does exactly the same. He starts by reconstructing his own car crash, then he reconstructs the car crashes of the rich and famous, James Dean, Catherine Mansfield, Albert Camus. And then he just reconstructs everything until the whole world becomes a generalized car crash. This is our condition. It's not my memory, this is a general condition. And I think, that's what's going on in my hero's reconstructions, very much. It's a kind of an opening out of a private model of identity into a kind of networked, shared, collective, and traumatic one. Yeah.
But I think that a very important scene in this book is when the main character asks her past girlfriend, Catherine, about her most vivid memory from her childhood. And she
talks about swings.
Yeah,
in the
she's
garden,
talking about playground and something like that. And after that, he did it the same reconstruction in his tenement house.
Yeah, he incorporates her memory.
Yeah,
I think that's love.
Yeah, maybe.
I think that's love. I think that's a very, he doesn't want to have a relationship with her. Neither would I. She's annoying.
Yeah.
But he incorporates her this one little detail. I mean, later, when he reconstructs the drug dealer's death that he's never met, that's been shot on the street, I think, you know, I find that a kind of, I like him when he does that. You know, if you think about it, this man has been shot, a human life has ended there on that spot. And the police take some photographs and they clean the blood away and then they open the street up again. And my hero is going, no, that's not enough. You know, this must be not just memorialized, but somehow experienced. We must, you know, he appropriates, just as he does with Catherine Swing's, her playground, he appropriates this man's death into his own experience and does it again and again and again in such a way that if nobody stopped him, he'd still be doing it now. I think that's a kind of very ethical moment in a way. I mean, you can also see it as a very exploitative moment. He's just trying to be authentic by stealing someone else's experience. But at the same time, I think there's a kind of, again, this breaching of the self, this opening to the other, the space of the other, which is important.